Hello and welcome to the second season of Comic Culture. I'm Terrence Dollard, a professor in the Department of Mass Communication and a lifelong comic fan. Judging by the sheer number of films and television shows based on comics in recent years, I'm not alone. This year we hope to bring you conversations with writers and artists and critics and scholars that will explore how comics are created and how they impact our lives. My guest today is Christy Blanch. In April of 2013, Christy taught Gender in Comics, a massive open online course for Ball State University. She hosted a panel at San Diego Comic-Con and recently became the co-owner of a comic shop. Christy, welcome to Comic Culture.
Thank you for having me.
Now, let's talk about gender in comics. What inspired you to teach this course?
Well, the whole idea of the course came up in a class I was taking. I'm getting my doctorate right now. And my instructor kind of asked me to step outside the box for a final project.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was a women in education course. And so I decided I would create this, course on using how to teach gender through comic books. And I did a presentation for it for the class. Somebody in there taught a gender class. They asked me if I would present in their class, and I did. And then they asked me to present at Women's Week, and I did. And then they asked me to teach the course, so I jumped at that. And then them asking me to teach the MOOC, I was about halfway through my course and teaching it face-to-face, and Ball State came to me and asked if I would teach a MOOC. And I jumped at the chance because I love teaching, and I love teaching with comics, and I think online learning is, I'm a big proponent of lifelong learning, and I think that's what MOOCs, really provide. I think there's a void there for people who want to continue learning, and I think MOOCs provide that. So I jumped at the chance.
Well, I took the class. I had a lot of fun taking the class, and I was surprised at how much I learned and how much I was able to apply it to films and to books, and just really fascinating stuff. Now, each module of the course, you use comics as sort of the gateway for conversations on gender issues. So how did you select your reading list?
Oh, that was tough. I had a larger reading list for the class. For the online class, I had to be aware of a few things because since it was open to all the continents. So we had 6 continents. Not everybody has a comic shop where they can just go and pick up the books. Not everybody has it even where Amazon will deliver. So I went to Comixology and I asked them if they would give a discount to students for this class. So I was limited to the books that Comixology carried, which actually is quite a lot. The only 2 that I really wanted to use that they didn't have was Ms. Marvel #1, which Marvel, as soon as we asked them, put it right up. And I wanted to use Lois Lane #59, the one where Superman and Batman play all sorts of jokes on Lois. But DC couldn't get that up. So I ended up I used another 1960s Action Comics. So that worked out. I chose them because, one, I tried to get people I could interview, and I used their books. But I chose those people because of the books. I chose Brian K. Vaughan because he writes Why the Last Man. I chose Terry Moore because he writes Strangers in Paradise. So I tried to use books that weren't normally thought of as educational. You can read Persepolis and you can read, Mouse, and those are pretty normal in the classroom. Well, I wouldn't say normal, but they're
accepted.
They're accepted in the classroom. So I wanted to really show that you can use comics, and you can use comics, everyday comics, the Batmans, the Daredevils, the Secret Six. You can use all of those to teach these ideas, and that's part of the issues that we're learning our culture through these books, and they're emphasizing what we, our cultural norms. And so I wanted to pick books like anybody can just pick up at a comic book store. But again, they have to be available on Comixology. I had a huge list. It was probably 4 times as long as the one I ended up with. But we wanted to stick to about $75. So I had to trim it down, and it was really, really hard. And there's so many other books that I wanted to use. I put a lot of them on the extended reading list. If you wanted to read more, you can read these. But it was really difficult. But I read books that, for example, with Why the Last Man, to me, it's a gender textbook. I read it, and it just screams gender. Same thing with Strangers in Paradise. It just, look at all these issues. So it was really difficult, but I picked ones that, one, were just regular books, and two, that were available on Comixology, and three, ones that spoke to me when I thought about gender.
Well, I mean, that brings up a couple of points. One, I'm ashamed to admit that I never read Strangers in Paradise. I would always see it in the comic shop. I read Love and Rockets. I see them as similar books.
Yeah.
But I was very happy that that was part of the reading list, because it was a great introduction to Terry Moore, and I'm very pleased now that I've been keeping up with Strangers in Paradise. I haven't quite started Rachel Rising yet.
It's good too.
I've just read that it's a little scary, and I'm a coward. But for our audience who might not know, what is Comixology?
Comixology is a digital comic store. So they have all of the comics that come out from DC and Marvel, usually same day. Sometimes they're a little bit behind. And then they have a backlog of comics. So there's a lot of comics available. One of the big problems I had is I really wanted to use Strangers in Paradise, and it wasn't on Comixology for the longest time. And then finally, it was right when I was making some of my final decisions, and I was thinking, well, maybe I can use Echo. That's another one of the series. It's good. It's good. It's a great series. It's not as gender oriented as Strangers in Paradise is, but then at the last minute, Strangers in Paradise went up. I was so happy. But you can go there and you can download comics. Well, you don't download them, but they store them for you, and then you can read them anytime you want to on your iPad, on your computer, on your phone. And it's just a really easy way to get comics, especially for people. And we had people in Australia and Brussels, and we had a large contingent in Spain and in France. So that way they could get these comics, because normally they couldn't any other way. And a lot of people don't live right near a comic store also. So it's helpful in that way.
All right, well, I think we have just a few seconds left before we have to go to our first break. So how many students were in the course total?
They were about 7,200.
70. And I know one of your assignments was to create a comic based on gender. How many submissions did you get out of that 7,200?
I figured there would only be like about 50, maybe 100, and we got over 800. So
that's amazing.
I read all of them.
I hope you enjoyed mine. But we're going to take a short break, and when we come back, we'll continue speaking with Christy. But when we do go, you'll be taking a look at a video from the Florence Comic-Con, the first Comic-Con that they've held in Florence, South Carolina. And enjoy the video.
Right now I'm joined by Wallis Roger. Wallis Roger is a true independent comic book publisher. Wallis, what is the process that goes through this? I know nowadays with the technology the way it is, it's a little bit easier to kind of put together a comic book on your own. Back in the day, it was kind of hard to do, like a printing press type thing. What's it like mass producing one of these things?
It's honestly a pain in the butt, really. It takes a while to print them, and it's a true labor of love, really. It's sometimes they don't print out right, and everything. I have to throw it away, do it again, but I'm doing this all for you guys.
Now, are you printing this with your own personal computer at home?
Yes, I am. It's my own personal computer. It's my own money that I'm putting into it. It's something that I love to do. I've always loved to do it, and I'm happy to be here at Comic-Con for sure.
Now, what kind of, how are you putting these together? What's the plotting like of these stories? How are you figuring out what to do with these stories that you're coming up with?
Well, I'll think of something that happened in my past, and then what I'll do is I'll write down the story, and I'll get that straightened out right, get it just right like I want it, make sure it's accurate, and then I'll start making the comic, which, as you can see, sometimes it turns completely different from the story, but it's all inspired by true stories, and they all are true stories 100%, and I just put it all together in Photoshop.
So that's pretty neat. You can use Photoshop and you can use your own personal computer to do something that years ago you couldn't do on your own. Nowadays, you can kind of put it together, and you don't have those editors who are critiquing everything that you write. This is 100% Wallis Rogers.
Right, that's right, and I'm encouraging other people to do this too. I mean, it's kind of hard, but it's worth it. It's worth it. Every time I get one of these in my hand finished, it's so worth it, especially since I'm the one in charge, you know. I'm the one that decides what goes into it and everything, and I can make sure that the quality is perfect for my own taste, because if I don't like it, then I'm not going to put it out. And sure, it's a little rough around the edges because it is handmade and hand stapled and everything, but I put my all into this.
So it's almost like you have a sense of accomplishment coming from this.
Right, exactly. I put my blood, sweat, and tears in this literally, and I've gotten a really, really awesome thing out of it, and I never imagined I'd be here at Comic-Con today.
Welcome back to Comic Culture. We're talking with Christy Blanch. We're going to pick up where we left off. Now, in the course, Gender in Comics, you had the class take the BEM sex role inventory test as various comic book characters. Yes. According to BEM, who is the most masculine superhero?
The ones we took, we did Batman, Superman, and of course Bruce Wayne and Clark Kent, Wonder Woman. We just looked at a few of these. It came out as Batman. Interesting, Superman came out as either androgynous or nearly feminine, and Clark Kent was feminine. And
that's mostly because Superman or Clark Kent would be looking for resolutions to problems with more dialogue.
And yeah, he's empathetic and he cares and he has feelings. One of the questions is, do you like children? And you have to rate that from 1 to 7. Mm-hmm. So Superman, of course, loves children. So that makes him more feminine. So yet Wonder Woman came out more masculine. So that just shows you how our culture really defines masculine and feminine. But yet, Wonder Woman comes out as masculine, yet she's a feminist icon. So it just was a really interesting experiment to see how we think of things. I think of Superman as extremely masculine, but he comes off with this test, according to our culture, as nearly feminine.
Right. Well, I guess, if you try and find peaceful solutions to problems, that doesn't make you the most manly of folks. We're used to that Rambo mindset, I guess.
Exactly. Exactly.
Well, speaking of some of these gender issues in comics, let's talk about women in refrigerators. What does that mean?
Women in refrigerators was a site and a term that Gail Simone came up with when she was a fan, before she was writing. And it came up because a Green Lantern came home and found his girlfriend chopped up and in the refrigerator. And she went and looked at all of the different females in comics and how they had been either depowered, killed, maimed, tortured, raped. And the list is huge. It's not so much for men, but it gives women, when women get put in refrigerators, it gives the men drive. It gives them a reason to continue on, a reason to become a hero. And that happens a lot, where women are there just to move the story along instead of being their own character. So it was just really making a point, and yes, that happens to men too, but it happens to a lot more women.
Right. I think that was one of those concepts that the course opened my eyes up to, and I kind of watch a lot of the old James Bond movies with Sean Connery in that ironic sense, because a lot of them are really bad, but it always seems that whenever there's a female character, she's going to get killed, and she's going to be the plot point that gets him to, find Spectre or whatever is going on, and they're never really seen as real characters. It's always more as a prop.
Yes. Yeah, they're seen as a prop and a way to move the story along. And it gets old after a while, and that isn't how it should be. So Gail just really brought that to light, and you can see that in her work now, and her work throughout the years, like The Secret Six. Her women just aren't plot devices. Mm-hmm. And you can see that in a lot of other writers too. Greg Rucka, Brian Bendis, Mark Waid, Terry Moore. You don't see that. You see real women being written. A lot of other writers too, but those are just ones off the top of my head.
I remember there was a big controversy years ago when John Byrne changed Sue Storm's code name from the Invisible Girl to the Invisible Woman. And people were thinking that's just it's a sign of the apocalypse.
Yeah. Well, yeah, they did it. A lot has happened to Sue Storm, and then there was the time when Wonder Woman lost her powers, which was supposed to be empowering. Denny O'Neil meant for it to be showing you that she can be a strong woman without powers. But what he didn't think about was, and it wasn't intentional in any way, but she was one of the only women characters that people had at that time to get behind. And then she was no longer a superhero. She was somebody who was tough. Mm-hmm. So they brought that back. But she had really cool outfits during that time.
Well, it's interesting. We'll be speaking with Denny in October, so I'm going to make sure that we discuss that.
Yeah, please do.
Now, this year, Lois Lane turned 75 years old, but DC Comics chose to focus on some supporting character in the book, Superman.
Yeah.
Now, how did Lois go from being a tough-as-nails reporter to being merely Superman's girlfriend?
Well, we looked at this in the class, and we really looked at this. We read the 1938 Action Comics of Superman and Lois Lane, and Lois was a tough-as-nails character, and she was really, somebody wanted to cut in and dance with her, and she was like, Clark was like, oh, you better let them, and she was like, no, and slapped him. She still ended up getting saved by Superman, but she was tough, and she stood up for herself. In the 60s, my theory is, as soon as Mort Weisinger took over, but a lot of comics did this in the 50s and 60s. After the war, the media was trying to push women, go back to home, get out of the workplace, you're taking jobs from men. She became this simpering, I want to marry Superman, I just want to find out his identity. They took away all of her, she didn't get her job on her own. The big 3 scoops that she got to get her job at Daily Planet were actually Superman's doing. So they took a lot away from her, and her comic was even titled Superman's Girlfriend, Lois Lane. However, it was also Superman's pal, Jimmy Olsen, because Superman was that's all that mattered in that universe was Superman. They actually would exchange stories. If something was written for Superman or for Lois Lane, oh, we'll just put that in Jimmy Olsen this week or this month. It didn't matter. But I think a lot of it was to push back from, from the war and after the war. And you have this whole attitude of men and people like Mort Weisinger who didn't really appreciate women, who thought that this was the role of women. And it really came through in the comics. It really, really shows. And then you can see when feminism comes in too. And now we read Birthright in the class, and you can see Lois Lane was really back to herself, and she was tough. And she, the first time Superman sees her and really starts falling for her, she's sticking up for Jimmy Olsen. Mm-hmm. So against a big editor. And so she really comes back into her own. I don't know why DC ignored her in the 75th year anniversary, because it could have been. My thinking is probably because they're really pushing the Superman Wonder Woman storyline. And Lois Lane isn't in the picture much anymore. But that's just my thinking. But I don't know why they would, because Lois Lane's one of my favorite characters, and I think I would totally read a Lois Lane reporter comic in a heartbeat.
I would as well. We're going to have to take a short break right now. We'll be right back with more comic culture after these brief messages.
It's one of the many ways to fight osteoarthritis pain. For more information on managing pain, go to fightarthritispain.org.
Looking for these? You drive buzzed. It could be one very expensive ride.
First, you gotta make bail. Then pay me to get your car back.
Your insurance premiums will go through the roof.
And my legal fees just keep adding up. All told, it could end up costing you $10,000.
Nothing kills a buzz like getting pulled over for buzz driving, because buzz driving is drunk driving.
Know what?
What?
Since I got adopted, I've learned a lot about these humans.
I know. I mean, check out these two. It's Flirt City over here.
Yeah, I noticed that. It looks like my human is definitely into your human.
Oh, look! I think she's getting his number.
Nice.
Your human's got some sweet moves.
Takes after his dog. Oh, look, they're doing that thing where they put their arms around each other.
She kicked up a leg. It's like in the movies.
That's awesome. Looks like we're going to be hanging out a little bit more.
Get your
Yes, I am. Give it to him hard. No, 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 now.
Every day, kids witness bullying.
Why you stabbing me with it? No.
They want to help,
Ow.
but don't know how. Teach your kids how to be more than a bystander. Visit stopbullying.gov.
Welcome back to Comic Culture. Now, we're talking with Christy Blanch, who taught the course Gender in Comics. I know it sounds like I'm bashing DC Comics a bit, but they've made some questionable decisions regarding their female characters, especially in the New 52. The first controversy was involving Starfire, who a lot of the younger audiences remember from the Teen Titans Go cartoon series on Cartoon Network. And now she's in Red Hood and the Outlaws, and the thing was she was having sex with just about anybody. So how does this impact the female reader?
Well, in my class that I taught on campus, I had my students read that, and I had them read Voodoo #1. They told me I was mean, but it doesn't really just impact the female reader, I think. I think it impacts the male reader too, because the men in the class didn't particularly care for it. They like to have women characters to root for, and having somebody, yes, she's an alien, and yes, they tried to explain it away, but there's really no excuse for that. It didn't add anything to the story. It didn't do anything except take a character that is beloved by so many little girls and boys and make her into something that they don't want to read. So I really don't understand why they did that. There's other characters they can do that with. For example, Voodoo, they had her as a stripper so she could get information from the people that would come in there for this local air base or this army base. One of my students said, well, because she can impersonate people. They were like, well, why didn't she just impersonate an army person to walk in? And I was like, that's a good question. So I don't know why DC did that. They've done the same thing with the whole Harley Quinn. You know, draw Harley Quinn in a bathtub naked with a toaster. And they explained it by saying, you know, well, there was no context with that. It doesn't matter. That's so wrong on so many levels. And it was just a bad decision by DC. And I think it would have been better if they would have just come out and apologized right away and said, oh, you know, they said, well, maybe it wasn't sexualized. Well, then you didn't have to say in a bathtub naked. You could have just said in a bathtub. You don't have to be naked in a bathtub if you're going to commit suicide. You don't really care at that point, right? So I don't know. It just came across as wrong to me. They have made some bad decisions, and you know, there's Batgirl, which is good, and a few others that, you know, I would say Batwoman, but I have mixed emotions about that too.
Well, again, DC, not to beat up DC, we love you, DC. But the Batwoman decision that came out recently, they have a policy, I suppose, that female character or any character can't get married because they want to keep the perpetual storyline going. Mm-hmm. But Batwoman was scheduled to marry her female lover.
Yes.
And they had built up, I guess, for over 2 years, the relationship between these two characters, and it was going to be, I guess, the end of this story arc, and then at the last moment they pulled the strings on it. So DC does seem to be doing some interesting decisions here, but I guess that leads me to my next topic here. Just allow me to be the devil's advocate a little bit. We're talking about comics, and we're talking about how female characters are written and how it impacts a female audience, but aren't comic books written simply for guys?
Yeah. No, actually they're not. Back when comic books were first being written, more females read them than men. They had the romance comics, and they had, you know, the comics for kids. So they weren't really for boys. They turned out kind of being a boys' club. But I think if you write just for men, you're getting rid of, there's 50% of the population you're ignoring, which from a business standard is just absolutely ridiculous. Every time I think that this is getting better, I read something. I just read somebody wrote into Brian Bendis and said, I don't understand why you're pandering towards women and you're writing women into the X-Men, into the lead stories. And characters like Jean Grey and Rogue they're secondary characters. You know, why are you always pandering to women? They're always screwing up comicdom. And I could not believe it. Really? First of all, Jean Grey has never been a secondary character, ever in a million years. And Brian Bendis' response was great. He was wonderful and said, "I'm glad you wrote this as anonymous because I don't want to know you." and you're totally missing the point of the X-Men. The X-Men is all about acceptance and tolerance, and you're missing the whole point. Women don't screw up comicdom; they add to it. Comicdom isn't just for. Tell my daughter that. Tell my 13-year-old daughter that, and she'll probably, punch you. So, I mean, she loves Lock and Key. Right now she's reading Battle Pug and Trillium, and she reads comics. She comes in the shop and loves it. I don't know why it really, I kind of have an idea of why it got to this. We don't have enough time to get to it in this show. I can talk a lot.
Well, that's true. I mean, one thing I would say about the X-Men, it's traditionally always had very strong females in the cast. And if you go back to the Claremont issues, it was always about Storm and,
Exactly.
Kitty Pryde. And it seems kind of short-sighted to not recognize, as you're saying, that you've got a lot of characters out there that make stories better. So why are we just trying to pander?
Yeah, we shouldn't pander towards one or the other. If a character should be in the story, it's male or female, they should be in the story. It doesn't matter. Their gender doesn't matter.
Okay. Well, it seems like we have about 1 minute left. You just recently became co-owner of a comic shop. Why don't you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, my friend Jason, who owned the comic shop before, it's a great comic shop, and we were just talking one day, and we've been friends for 7 years, and he kind of wanted to get the store to the next level, but couldn't quite get the cash flow to do that. And so we talked about it, and along with my friend Mark Wade, we decided that we would all join forces, and we found a new location for the store in downtown, and we've moved, and it's one of the most wonderful experiences I've ever had.
I'm sorry
I know.
I'm sorry to cut you off. We are just about out of time. I do want to thank you so much, and I wish you nothing but success with the store. What's its name?
It's Alter Ego Comics in Muncie, Indiana, and we're on Facebook, so you can like us.
Well, I'm going to make sure I go do that. But we have run out of time. I'd like to thank you, Christy, for joining us today. I'd like to thank you for watching. Join us on the next episode of Comic Culture. We'll be speaking with Chris Claremont of X-Men fame. Until then, thanks so much for watching. Enjoy the day.